So we're very pleased to have Tod Williams and Billie Tsien Architects join us this year at ACAW. They were able to field a team, and we're very excited about their work with us. Tod Williams and Billie Tsien have been on the forefront of contemporary architectural practice for the last few decades. They are winners of numerous design awards and also have received recognition for their leadership in the discipline, including National Medals of Arts and National Academy inductions. They write that they measure the value of their work by the quiet pleasure of lives lived in their buildings. A significant part of that comes from a consistent concern for materiality as a vehicle to define form, but also lived experience. The hand and haptic perception plays an important role in their work. TWTA did field a team this year in ACAW, and we're very glad to have them. They have used ceramics in their work previously, and so this was an opportunity to explore further the potential of that material. So with that, let me welcome both Tod Williams and Billie Tsien.
Thank you so much, Omar. You wanted to start out with a few words about why we're here, what we're doing.
The real work for our team, we're people who will talk to you later about the specific project, but we're really honored to be keynote speakers. I was thrilled when we were asked to take on this assignment. Typically, we don't do pure material research. We always think about materials in relationship to a project. So or place, yeah, and both place and project. So at the moment, we don't have a specific project here. Nonetheless, I thought it would be really fascinating to be able to take this on and see what happens. We will have much more explanation about that. But today, for the keynote, I think what we want to do is talk about the importance of beauty. Certainly that's something that Terracotta can give us an outstanding and extraordinary beauty. And I know that the work that you all have done, other teams will have an equal, if not greater beauty than the ones we've got. It's all there to be shared.
I want to say that this is actually not our first encounter with Boston Ballet, and Boston Ballet is doing some beautiful, beautiful terracotta pieces for a project that we're doing in Mexico City, the American Embassy. And so I got the pleasure of going up and seeing both the incredible sort of industrial technique, but also the incredible hand techniques that are there. And so I think our team from our studio, with the opportunity to go and see what you do there, incredibly blown away by the potential. So we're very excited about what's happened. We're very excited about what can happen. So maybe we should start now?
Yeah. We gave this title Tough Beauty, and then we're basically filling in the work for the title. But the beauty, I mean, this is extraordinary beauty. This is the back of Khan's work in Ahmedabad. And we have been there. We are ever in awe of this. And of course, it's ordinary brick and concrete. And I particularly love this because of the plainness of the facade at this back area, the mute quality and yet the power of that. Of course, it can happen with any material. So we're not really extolling just the virtues of terracotta or unit masonry, but any material.
Next.
Facades, in my opinion, are always most powerful when they are opaque, and rarely as powerful when they're glass. So as we try to essentially work with opaque facades. Now, clearly, the UNAM building in Mexico City is an incredible example of an ornamented facade, but which actually comes from the history of the Mayan civilization itself. It's very, very interesting and connected.
Painted by Juan O'Gorman, an artist who really was focused in Mexico City. But the power of decoration, and to some extent that starts to talk about the melding of both the solid form and decoration. And it's something that is very apparent in the use of terracotta. You can have both.
I also believe that the value of human labor and the love behind that labor. So we're always trying to celebrate the people who build our buildings, and from the most seeming menial worker to the most extraordinary craftsman and artist. Next. Yeah, and of course we put in the Pantheon here, and in this case, everyone knows the ceiling of the dome of the Pantheon. Once again, I think that in large measure, architecture gets its beauty by the wash of light and the opacity of the surface rather than the transparency. So in a way, it's what is solid and what is tough that is most interesting, at least in this discussion.
Next.
Everyone knows this, but I should say we couldn't not show this project because we had an idea when we did the Folk Art Museum. And I should say, although this time I haven't been up to Boston Valley, I have been there before. The facade of our building is in a way restored, or our studio is restored by Boston Valley. As Billie indicated, she's been up to look at the terracotta for our embassy. But here we are at Talik's workshop, actually wanting to understand how open casts are done. Billie and me here on the left, and me lifting a hot plate that is from the open cast. So for the Folk Art Museum, I don't think we possibly could have done this without actually beginning to not only think about the material, but also try to understand its possibilities.
Yeah.
An open cast is a quite uncontrolled way of casting metal. It can be dangerous, and it's also important that we understand the danger both from the fumes and from the pouring itself. But we like the idea of work that is not perfect. We think that all work has imperfections, and imperfections are part of the human hand.
Next.
So this is a drawing of the facade. I think it was the first time I realized that I wanted the facade to be largely opaque and to catch light. So we knew that the Museum of Modern Art would be glass, and we said, we don't want to be like the Museum of Modern Art. We want to be solid. We chose Thomasville. We first wanting to be different, certainly when we're thinking about metal. Frank Gehry had just done Bilbao, and everyone was excited by that. I felt perhaps we should pour this facade on the street itself and see if we could do tilt-up concrete, maybe even embed some of the street debris in it, but that idea was not warmly accepted. Eventually, we tried open cast aluminum. That became extremely dull, and finally settled on a material called Thomasville, which was at that time being sold at about $2.15 a pound, largely used for industrial purposes. Thomasville is today. I'm afraid we have to make sure that Thomasville is cast in enclosed forms, and indeed it generally is. So I don't think this is the correct application or use. Nonetheless, we did it and learned later. These are early tests of the panels. In the one on the lower left, where there are 4 panels, and the one above that, we're actually creating a false joint in the panel. In the end, we didn't do that. We were casting that over a steel plate, so the metal is poured. The cut is in the plate. The curve is in the plate. The metal is poured on top of that. And it pools and dries much like a pancake. And the other ones, the 2 on the right, we were simply pouring it onto the factory floor. Unfortunately, what you see is that there's moisture in the concrete, and the concrete basically bubbles up and creates air pockets in the metal, which looked very, very interesting, but destroyed the floor. So that wasn't a good solution. In the end, we chose a kind of a resonated sand and made it an open joint system with very large panels that I think we made another mistake in the panels began to warp as they cooled. They warped in a panel that might be 10 feet. It would warp possibly 2 feet. So we had to put frame behind that and then hang the panels on the building. I still think there's some merit to the idea. Of course, the building was destroyed, and the Museum of Modern Art is a glass building now. The panels, I guess, I'm a little ashamed of the panels. The Museum of Modern Art has said they're storing them somewhere in the ground in New Jersey. I've always wondered what we should do with them. I have no idea because they were part of the building.
Next.
This is a fortuitous photograph, I think, because as the material aged, it became quite a bit more dull, and it probably needed to be cleaned every 20 years or so. It was never cleaned before it was taken down. But we love the irregularity of the panels to panel to panel, and that certainly is something that we feel in a different scale is possible with terracotta.
Next. Next. This is a project in Phoenix that really began with trying to understand how one could build something using the technology and the capability of industry nearby. So Arizona is a very big precasting industry because it's got good weather, dryness, and space. And so
like to put up cheap buildings.
Yeah, they put up cheap, fast buildings, so that the starting to think about what you could do with precast was a kind of beginning point for this project, the Phoenix Art Museum Next.
Well, hold it, slow down, go back. I actually am looking at this. These panels that we're seeing here are the second phase of this project, which actually was in 2000. So we have 2 phases of the project, both of which we use precast. And we use a slightly different approach. The same precaster, which had its yard about 5 miles from the Phoenix Art Museum site. I don't know that they're still there or not, but this is actually taken from early 2000, I would say 2004. Yeah, it was, I'm horrified and love the possibilities of the swift erection of precast buildings. And in this particular case, our museum, the first edition, there on the back on the left was actually put 60 feet wide, and it was set in what was formerly a parking lot. So the actual footprint of the museum is in fact 60 feet by, well, quite a few hundred feet, maybe 500 feet. Talk about this, Billie. This is a panel, a close-up of a panel of the first phase of Phoenix.
Well, one of the things we were interested in was how to give a sense of coolness. And the Palo Verde trees were very interesting to us, coming from the Northeast, where the bark itself was a pale green and the trees were a pale green. And so this idea of a building that would have a connection to the trees planted in front of it was interesting to us. So we researched aggregate and found a pale green calcite that was from Utah. Next.
Well, no, hold it. I think there's another, yeah, we're now looking at the building, which you may know.
To go in half an hour.
Sorry, it'll be okay. Next. So these are the first phase of the building. It's a little light, a little too, I think, both we intended it to be a little too much like a 56 Thunderbird, which is what's one of the ways I thought about Phoenix. The panels are the width of each of the joints, and they're the full height of the building. So the erection went up very, very fast on a concrete base. And I look forward to doing this again. There are challenges with it, but the speed and the cost was extraordinary. I wonder, obviously putting terracotta, since the aggregate could be put on a precast panel, we didn't do this, but simply embedding the terracotta on large precast panels might be something that would be very interesting. Next, those holes, yeah. And then we put a kind of corrugation in it, so you can see the widths of the panels and the corrugation, which in this case has a series of nice shadows, very, very inexpensive, very large joints. But I could imagine any surface could be, it could be many things that would be embedded on that, in that.
I mean, I think the question is, how can you articulate something that is so essentially big, dumb, and flat? Next.
I kind of like the thickness of the pencil. This is the second phase. We didn't want it to be exactly like the first. It was slightly different technique for building the building. In fact, the whole building became much more a precast building. And we used the diagonal slash in the panel to acknowledge that this was a horizontal project, much simpler, more dumb. But we also then changed the matrix a little bit, using a similar but close, so it's more muted than the first phase. Yes. Kind of more somber. And just images of the building. Again, I think perhaps it's far too solid a facade, but once again, solidity gives additional beauty to the glazed when it is glazed. So I think both are critical, but I don't see how transparent buildings can exist without solidity.
Next. This is a project at Penn, and Penn is a campus essentially of brick, but it is also a campus that has stone in it. And the stone, the most beautiful stone there is a green stone that's no longer quarried. So we started to think about how could we glaze bricks in an irregular way so that they could be both brick and stone.
Well, this brick, if you look closely, is actually a manufactured brick that has a roller that dents the brick and striates the brick and creates each brick to be slightly different by the way it's cut out of the clay block. It then gets it's fired one time and then we overglaze it with a second glaze. This simply shows that we had a number of failures working with castaic brick. The problem, and I don't think it's a big problem, but unfortunately people get very tired of I think, worrying about what is perfect and what is not perfect. In our opinion, perfection has a very, very broad and sweeping set of possibilities. But of course, stability and cost are also important factors. It turned out well. Castaic, unfortunately, is not there. That's the building on the left on the Penn campus that we justified our green brick for. It's a brick campus, and of course, this is the Saarinen dorm, also right near our building. And the building, in the end, sits between two relatively old but plain brick buildings, and so we wanted to relate to it, but be different. You can see the brick actually laid up. Unfortunately, we hoped the brick wouldn't be laid up in that way. We said they could lay it up any way they liked, but you could see that the irregularity, it came as the brick was palletized, it came out that way. And so
it's kind of like a weaving. I think it's fine.
No, it's cool.
Next.
But it wasn't what we intended.
Well, that's sometimes the better.
Yeah, no question about it.
So you can see a close-up of the brick. The patterns, the depressions do repeat. You can see the diagonal marks keep on coming back, but the glazing actually gives it another life. So it's it does have a kind of flickering quality. Next.
And I think they were quite pleased with the way. We then also used it to bring it into the garden. So here we've actually applied it to a concrete wall to kind of make sure that one realized that it could be used in tile form, sliced thin or solid, and that it was all about surface and in a way warmth, and it could be also connected to the idea of landscape. In fact, the choice of the green, well, we'll talk about that in a moment.
Next. The interior has a stairway running through it. It connects to buildings on both sides. And we originally had a skylight, but the skylight was removed for cost reasons. So we thought about how do you bring light through the center next.
Well, by the way, I just wanted to emphasize that what I love about terracotta is that it can be used on the outside of the building, and people think of it as just being the exterior cladding, but there's no reason it can't be used on interiors as well.
So the streets of Philadelphia have many ginkgo trees planted on them. And actually this street is full of ginkgo trees, which many of you may know in the fall turn a brilliant yellow. So this idea of the yellow of the ginkgo, because the trees themselves kind of have their own light. And so we use that color, thinking about that color, and also whether you could make marks, and that's going back to the brick. Marks that were the same marks, which are this depression, but rotate the tile so that you could get a kind of, once again, flickering sense of light.
But hold it, stop. We had the idea that you would just simply take a clay tile and put your thumb in it, create a depression, and then pool, the glaze would pool in that. In the end, this was done by Heath. We love Heath, but they're a different company now. And I think the issue is whether the company really wants to produce tiles in mass, and or whether you want to actually be able to do mass production as well as hand production. And I think actually Boston Valley has a very, very interesting company because of that, which is that I believe it will at least always be a kind of bridge between the hand and the machine. And I think that I admire tremendously. Perfection and consistency can be challenging. It's particularly when one is baking tile, for example, or brick. Next. At Lakeside, we wanted to show this because this is a kind of preamble to our thinking for the ACAW project that we won't get into at the moment. The one aspect of the project in Brooklyn was that we had a very big building and we wanted to have a very small impact in Prospect Park. And so we used it was a skating rink, largely a water play. So we used the inspiration of the ice skaters' marks as a way by which we would then mark the ceiling of the building, which was the largest surface we had, other than the green roof above. And I'm sure many of you have been there, but this is the way the building is viewed as you walk up to it. In a way, the facade is the ceiling. And I do think that although terracotta is heavy and tile is heavy, there's no reason that tile can't be mounted horizontally. That's certainly basically the concept behind many buildings, Guastavino tile, among others. Next.
So the building itself is really seen as a non-building. And there are actually there's several robust buildings, but they're built into the ground and they are seen as a kind of extension of the wall. So what is truly the important aspect of this project, I think, are the two horizontal surfaces, the roof and the ice or the skating surface. Next.
The stone was entirely intended to be recessive. I thought it would show this image, which shows not only the structure, which is bar joists running across to a perimeter band beam, but what we ultimately did to create those marks. We actually applied channels that are in the ceiling, and in a way, we just painted them with silver, which could have been white as far as I could tell, and then created these marks. Now a scattering of lights, both in an even grid and an uneven grid, so that your focus is on the plane and the marks on the plane rather than on the lights itself. It's shockingly easy. So those are gouges that are in an EFA surface, creepy surface, I should say, but not bad when it's 25 feet above your head. Is that then those marks then are vaguely representative of either a painting, a mark, a skater's mark, de Kooning. They're not literal.
Next.
The reflection is off the light on the surface, in this case of polished concrete that becomes ice in the wintertime, just simply takes that light and bounces it up into those crevices. So I think the issue of light catching surfaces is terribly important in terms of the idea of tough beauty or ordinary beauty.
Next. And I think it's a possibility that is inherent with terracotta. So the possibility also of color toughness and the sculptural capabilities of light bending are very, very exciting. Next.
The final project is now just been topped out. It will take a couple more years before it's finished. Is the embassy in Mexico City. We're Matthias Gerritz, I think you all know, was the sort of person who really brought color and a kind of artistic element to Barragan's sobriety. So the two of them really worked collaboratively. And this on the left, it's Gerrit, and on the right, it's Gerrit's, though later working with Legaretta at the Camino Real. We visited there a number of times. Clearly, there were many things that inspired our building in Mexico City. Part of it being the Yunnan building, the Mayan ruins, a sense of the hand, again, that's so rich and interesting there in Mexico. This is the building is an enormous building. We've sunk it into the ground 2 stories. It's a stone-clad building, and this is Billie and my drawing of the facade. I guess we were doing it together, sort of discussing ideas about how one would compose a sunscreen, which if you look on the right, the 3 sides of the building, this is the west facade, there's the south facade on the right, and the east facade, are enormous sunscreens that sit in front of the building to, in a way, mute the ordinariness of the windows behind. And so the dimension there, they held off the building by 5 feet and themselves are 7 feet deep.
Well, essentially, embassies are just gigantic office buildings with repetitive windows. So there are 2 reasons why there's a sunscreen. One is that it actually needs to have shade from the sun. And the second one is in a sort of way like the Yunnan building to sort of overlay a whole pattern on top of what is essentially a very banal facade. And because so much of both sculpture and work in Mexico is very, very three-dimensional, starting with, as Tod says, the Mayan buildings. This gave us an opportunity to try to work with the sunscreen to add that sense of
We once again
layers.
worked with Hallex for the early mock-ups. This is my crappy drawing of how I thought the sunscreen might work. And it's a little different from this, which is we wanted these big, ordinary 2-inch thick, 2.5-inch thick windows to take the light deep into the building. And we had tried this before, and we realized that the sun, you basically don't want to look out up into the sky plane, which can be beautiful when the sky is when you're outside and you're looking at the clouds. But in general, you simply want to look out and down, but we want to bounce the light deep into the building. And actually, later calculations showed this wasn't a bad idea. We were hanging the sunscreen by brackets from the concrete frame that were spaced not as frequently as my early drawing, and the windows are much bigger, but this is a sort of beginning sketch. Then this is a formal rendering that we didn't do, but someone did, this is the west facade. Then the building is made of massive pieces of stone on concrete. You can see the windows are back there. And then this is a more technical drawing of the building. And then a small section, we created a mock-up, a full-scale mock-up. So you can see it's 50, this west facade of the screen is 296 feet long by 57 feet tall by 7 feet deep.
So what is a small mock-up, which is that red, you'll see in the next image, is in scale, actually, a quite huge mock-up. So this is when it was first fabricated. Actually, it was fabricated in Turkey. It has.
Well, we did mock-ups before that were much crappier, but this is a finished mock-up, still a mock-up. And it's made of different plates. Actually, we wanted to balance it out. There's, of course, structure internally. And there are plates, there's sheet metal, which you can see is on the left portion of the building, the image, which is much thinner, wrapped around a frame. And then their plate material, which are the pyramids, which are, what are they, quarter-inch thick, I guess. And then there's the open cast material on the right. So 3 different kinds of material. We use cartridge brass on all but the perimeter, and the outside frame is silicon bronze.
But as exciting as this was, it was a little terrifying because it's very bright and golden colored.
A little too Donald
and so very much we wanted to bring it to the site and see how it would weather, because we were counting on weathering. So if we can look at the next image. So this has been on the site now for several.
No, a year. This is 1 year on the site, or maybe it's not quite a year. And it, in fact, is beginning to actually get a lot of different kinds of color in it, which is beautiful. And so I think that, you know, you can't clean it. This will have a rig to clean it. The surfaces are all tipped to make sure water pours off of it and doesn't create a problem. But we love the differences in this. And I would say that is the end of our presentation. Just a series of different ways by which I think we should always think of buildings as basic. If we want buildings to be beautiful, your eye should go to the material, not to the void. One uses the void to look in it, but always think of the richness and possibilities of materials. And again, although we didn't have a specific idea for our ACAW project, we kind of fabricated one in order to realize that we always need to make things specific. So thank you. Thank you all. I don't know how our timing is.
We're good.
Okay. Happy to have questions and or be challenged. Just anything. Omar?
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Tod and Billie. That was amazing, incredibly beautiful work. So just for the audience, please, if you have questions, do put them into the chat. And I'll just begin by maybe doing some observations with you guys. I love this word that you're using, a tough beauty. But what was very interesting as you were speaking about tough beauty is your approach to material, or where you see tough beauty in some ways is one would, on a kind of more practical sense, say that where the material feels a little fragile. By that, I mean that, for instance, the way it catches light is one of the qualities you brought up, but I think of the Penn project where actually the brick looks like it's falling, or another project where the material is weathered in a particular, or seems to weather. And all of these things, of course, in this notion of a kind of industrial materialization where performance of material and strength of material is stability, the word stability you use as well. But in some ways, all of those words that you're using, stability, toughness, are being presented through a kind of weakness. That's sort of how I would say, a weakness of the material. Also, the lovely notion that accidents. We didn't exactly intend this, but that, you know, this accident happened and it has this incredible. Could you talk a little bit about this idea of a weakness, which may be a way to sort of get to this aesthetic, even though you're using this word tough?
Well, I think it depends on whether you consider perfection strength. And I think in a certain way, if you consider perfection, in other words, as sort of everything looks the same and it will be the same and it will stay the same and it won't change, is actually very unrealistic. because we all weather people and buildings. And so this idea of perfection, I think, is in a certain way discounting reality. So that's why I would say that I think, I'm not sure whether I would accept the word weakness. I would think it's more, it's about understanding that imperfection is an acceptance of the way things are, the way things truly are.
Well, I believe, I mean, the way we work, I mean, I appear to be strong, but in fact I'm weak, and Billie appears to be delicate or fragile or
Watch out.
smaller. I don't know, but she's tougher. The thing is, I do think that we all buildings need to actually perform, and the facade needs to perform. But I think this issue of the dialogue between what appears to be strong also being delicate or weak or fragile is extremely interesting, and it allows a range of interpretations that really are part of life and shouldn't be denied. And that's why I'm generally against things that the idea of, when we designed the presidential center, there are many people that criticized us for saying, well, the president is so transparent. Why didn't you make a transparent building? Well, Christ, what is the idea then behind that one-to-one relationship? And of course, transparent isn't actually transparent. So I'm I'm fascinated by the power and the positive aspects of contradictory statements or buildings and appearances. I don't know.
I'm
talking about, but
yeah, no, I think I find that, and I think also the audience is finding it particularly interesting, this idea of imperfection as not only a reflection of reality. I know that within our current framework of high performance facade, high performance everything, this question of materials being immutable, unchangeable is also perhaps on the industry side a kind of a direction, right? So that to be able to tell you, yes, this will perform at XYZ, temperatures and so forth, all of that hyper specification.
Yeah, but I mean, that's false advertising. I mean, because nothing will remain, and nobody wants to believe that. All of our buildings will be dust, as we will be. So I think it really bothers me when we overemphasize the ability for performance. We've never done a building where we didn't make a lot of mistakes. In fact, I pride myself on my mistakes and trying to learn from them, but I continue to make mistakes. It bothers the hell out of me, but it's the way it is.
One other aspect that I would like to maybe explore is a lot of the pictures that you have or how you photograph your work, there's always a desire to show the hand, whether it's in the production or even in, let's say, the appreciation of it. I think I'm just thinking of the Folk Art Museum where the child and the father are actually touching the surface. Many times when I also do see your work and one can understand the material and you sort of feel it in your hands or in your body more than it functions on the optics. So I wanted to explore a little bit with you with the haptics, because I know this is one of the things that we have found a lot with terracotta. And the first response with terracotta, everybody wants to get their hands dirty in it. You sort of have a kind of primordial feeling that somehow you have to squish this thing and form it. But I'm just kind of curious about obviously this idea of performance here in a very different notion, performance of the body, the performance of the hand in the aesthetic perception, and how you think about that. I imagine you've used the word craft or hand quite a bit when you do describe the work.
I think when we think about architecture, we are thinking about the experience of architecture and starting from the inside. So I think that it's always very much about how a place or space affects your body when you're inside, and then we work our way to the outside. So it is very haptic. It is very body sensory based architecture. How do you move? Where do you sit? You know, what is soft? What is hard? At the same time, I think Todd's particular interest is also in this idea of weight and permanence. So very much it's about creating a weighty, permanent, which is, we just said was impermanent, but we, you know, this desire that you will never achieve, a kind of enclosure or shell in which one has the ability to, you know, experience life. And not only, it's not only about experiencing the building, because I think essentially we're making containers. We're not making your life, we're making a container for your life. So experience life in a very positive way with the realization that your senses are important in all ways.
Yeah, the marks are temporary, but we want the marks on that we put on Earth to be good marks, though they won't remain. The materials won't remain. I love the unevenness of each unit of terracotta. That we wanted that in our work. We trust it. We want it to perform, but we don't want it to overperform. Sorry, just to be, and I don't want to sell that we can perform it at a level that we can't. So I love the idea of, and that was one of my little gripes. We still use heath tile, but they because they need to sell a lot of it, and they have a manufacturing process, and I still love them, but I feel like, you know, the only ones I like are the tiles or the pots that are imperfections. They're cheaper, and to me, if they hold up, that's the one I want.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about the experiments with Boston Valley and is how can you get a sense of difference in each tile, but make it a process which is not somebody stamping out each tile.
Yeah.
And so that was really an interesting, you know, way of thinking about it. It's been so that I mean, and Andy Brayman had a lot to do with that. So of course he was like stamping out the tile, but then when it goes back to Boston Valley, it's, well, how do you know, is it ram presses? How is this done so that it's not Andy going like this?
Well, and I also, I honestly, I still don't, I mean, we've learned a ton, but I still don't know anything about what we should do with this tile. I want to use it. We will use it. I feel like we don't choose catalog pieces of terracotta as one did 100 years ago. And I'm happy about that. But what is the method that is correct today? I don't know that I know. I know that I absolutely don't know. But I'm going to try anyway as soon as I get a shot at it.
I'm glad you bring up this, Billy, this question of, you know, the hand process, and then therefore then the industrial manufacturing, that then it brings the question of scale up. And I imagine this is something you constantly are dealing with, not only budgetarily, but also in terms of just architecture and what the word craft may mean in architecture, especially when we're dealing with labor. Obviously, we can understand craft for objects and labor and perception in that way. But if we think about craft on a building, is it the same? I mean, is there an analogy that could be made? Probably not, because of just the scale. You probably, I don't know, I'm just starting to get a sense of how you think about it. Clearly, some of the work that we saw, the Louis Kahn work in Ahmedabad was done by labor, hardly industrial, and therefore a lot of the imperfections you do see there is just a result of the actions of lots of hands and labor doing that. But that's not necessarily how we do build that way a lot in the global South, but we don't necessarily build that way everywhere. So I'm just trying to understand how, I mean, Todd, you just brought this up in terms of what you are trying to sort of, I guess, struggle with here in some ways. Partly it's the kind of almost aesthetic desire of the hand, the body, but then you have a scale that just doesn't lend itself necessarily to that perception, which is the scale of a building or scale of many buildings. How are you sort of, thinking about that?
Well, I mean, I will say, I wonder whether there's not something from, I'm wondering aloud, whether why did we put in the Mexico project? Because, I mean, it's ridiculously over detailed. I can't, I apologize for that. It just, somehow it came out on budget. I have no goddamn idea how the hell it happened. But I'm just saying, and it's on the project, but I would have said the issue of the super frame. So we have, if you accept that a facade, there's some aspect of a super frame. We did this at the Barnes a little bit, and I was going to put that in, is if you think about a frame that actually is not related to anything on the building, but rather to a composition itself, that frame can override other aspects of the ordinariness of a facade. So I'm really, I will work on this. I continue to work on this. And we, in fact, thought that the Barnes was a good model, and we probably should have shown it as to how we were then thinking about a very, very large facade in a systematic way.
Well, we tried when we first started. The team was looking at, can we clad a fairly simple building fully in terracotta panels? And it became so complicated and clumsy, actually, that the best aspects of the possibilities of terracotta were lost totally in a kind of trying to systematize. And that I know that there are other people who are doing that, so that's just a different head. For us, trying to systematize what we felt was that was squishing the possibilities. So then when we released it from having to clad an entire building, but we're thinking, okay, the underside of a surface or something, how can it catch light? Then you are freed. So essentially it's kind of like when you have a black dress and you put something fantastic on top of it. And so the whole thing doesn't have to be fantastic, but everybody is looking at that whatever thing that you attached to it. And I'm not saying that relegates terracotta to only a sort of small part of it, but if you can understand how there can be priorities and certain things are set back and certain things come to the fore, like the screen in Mexico City.
I think for example, yeah, I think there's a possibility. We don't know how to do it, but if the dress is made of terracotta, let's say, just simply, I don't give a damn what the units are. They're set down and you pour the concrete on top of it as a precast unit and make sure that unit is a super dumb unit. That could be the dress. And then on top of that, I would have said that you could do a more unique ornamentation, which actually could also be another system that is running against that. So I think that's a good analogy, and I think it can be done, but we didn't do it. But I'm just like, that's cool, yeah, that's great. Maybe that'll come to play, because I do love this material, and I do think, yeah. All I can say is I'm still trying to figure out how we can use more of it. We've taken these concrete columns and we have huge units of terracotta that are circular, as you may know, that are from Boston Valley. I don't know if they're showing it, that are super cool in my opinion, but it still feels like I don't know what I'm doing.
Oh, that's good.
That's good. We have more educating to do here. There is a question from the audience that I think is perhaps very interesting relative to what we're talking about materials and their life. The question is, considering your interest in detailing and the material life of your buildings, what are your thoughts on designing for disassembly, circularity, and reuse, and the visual tectonic implications of such a thing?
Sorry, we just missed, what are your, I missed part
of that. What are your thoughts on designing for disassembly, the circularity and reuse? I
Zero.
think Todd, yeah, Todd, you were talking a little bit about the folk art museum in that
Yeah,
way.
Yeah, I have no idea. I fucked it up. I no idea, no goddamn idea, zero, because I just don't. I'm sorry, and I realized I was thinking this morning, just let's take those plates and melt them down, or throw them in the. It's just like, what the hell? No, I don't think of reuse. We're thinking of trying to do the best we can, and that has to believe we have to believe it's going to be loved and changed, but not by us.
Right.
I cannot possibly imagine.
But I want to interject.
Okay,
I
sorry.
think reuse can take a number of different meanings, and it's like I reuse the glass and I turn it into a wine bottle, or vice versa.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Will you give me a little space here?
Okay.
I'm going to push him off the screen. But I think reuse also has to do with making, with reusing the space, not recycling the materials, but being able to come into an existing building, and that should be happening more and more, and giving it a new life. So I believe that the reuse happens through rethinking how you use what you already have, rather than taking things apart and reusing the materials to do something else.
No, you got it right. I didn't like the glass wine bottle thing, but sorry.
No.
I do think that buildings, it's really exciting to reuse buildings and not to disassemble them. I was against disassembly. I'm thinking about assembly versus disassembly, because
well, it's a question of where you drop the idea of reuse. Do you
no, I'm with you. I drop it and reuse. Eric,
yeah,
we've covered that. I think I believe so. I really believe in reusing buildings and having them change. I think that my instinct is that our buildings have enough in the basic body that they can be reused. And I suppose to criticize the Folk Art Museum was that it was a pop over-defined. And I don't think the solution was a correct solution in any way. I think it's a terrible, solution, but it was over-defined.
Yeah. Between over-defining something and making something that has no presence. You should.
Yeah. I mean,
no, I think, one of the challenges, I'm sure, for you within this, I was going to come back to the question of scale, or as we're talking about disassembly and so on. So much of it is tied to the systematization of materials. And I wonder, as you converse, Boston Valley may be an interesting industry, but you are conversing with multiple other industries. There are a few questions about, how do you allow for that kind of change, or this level of imperfection, if we go back to the original word, within industrial processes, where obviously you're not the ones that are necessarily making it, you're delegating it to industries that probably find that a kind of a curious thing as a conversation to start. Well, I want this not to be all the same, or or something like this color should have such variation. I imagine those discussions are rather difficult, but also their industrial processes must also.
I don't know whether you stopped on that or whether we lost the last little bit, but I do think that in every single project, if you can talk with the person who's making it and assembling it and modify our work relative to that, that is the best way to work. Absolutely. And the iterative work with Boston Valley on this was incredibly exciting. We couldn't have done it without that. And that's why I love to go to every site. I love to go to every manufacturing process. I want to talk to the contractor and the subcontractor, because we cannot do our work well without that. So we have no ideas. I have not a shred of an idea even that doesn't exist without other people. So you have to be able to allow that not to be a single person's vision, but a vision that's wrought through discussion and discourse, arguments.
Well, Tod and Billie, thank you so much for this incredible launch for today. I know that your team is about to go right after this, so I think it's a good segue for them. Thank you again. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Omar, and thank you all. Before the day is over, Billie and I will be on a plane. I mean, well before the day. So we're going to hang in here for a little while. And if you see us disappear, I apologize. I looked a little bit at the other work, and we know our work. I'll hang in as long as we can. But I just absolutely love the process. I'm sorry Billie and I weren't up there for this last assembly thing. It sounds utterly and completely fascinating. It's the best. So learning from others is the best. So thank you.